Hi. Last week we put a post on Laurel Hubbard. At 43, she is the first transgender Olympian picked for New Zealand's weightlifting team. Now, the comments on that post show there is a dire need for nuance, a dignified debate, and the possibility that we may not be comfortable with what we hear, which is also what makes it newsworthy. My name is Anubha Bhonsle, and this evening, trans inclusion in sport, fair game or not? Let's start with Laurel, who transitioned in 2013 from a man to a trans woman. The argument is Laurel and other trans women have an unfair advantage in women's sport. Number one, on grounds of testosterone. Studies have shown higher testosterone levels are linked to higher athletic ability. Often cited as proof is performance gap in sports. Let me explain. In the 100-meter track and field event, approximately 10,000 men worldwide have personal bests, faster than the current Olympic female champion. This performance gap is also why trans women need to keep their testosterone levels under a particular limit for 12 months to be allowed to compete. Whereas trans men who actually take testosterone during their transition have no such guidelines. The fact is, even after regulating a trans woman's testosterone levels, they'd still be higher than a biological female's levels. So the conclusion, testosterone equals increased physical capability, and so this is unfair. And what is sport, right? If not fair. Then there's the flip side, because there are equally credible studies that prove testosterone is just one of the many factors that affect sporting ability, and sometimes even negatively. For instance, an analysis by the International Association for Athletics Federation on elite women athletes found that women with higher T levels performed better in 5 out of the 21 events, and in 3, those with lower T levels actually did better. Several, including the International Olympic Committee, have concluded that majority of the policies were unfairly discriminating against transgender people, especially transgender females, because they overinterpreted the unsubstantiated belief that testosterone improves athletic performance. Then there are cases like India's Duti Chand, born female, lived her entire life as a cis woman, barred from participating in events because her T levels were higher than what was allowed for women athletes. Chand was just 18 then. By the way, Duti Chand confronted her ban by challenging the correlation of testosterone levels with superior athletic performance, and she won that in 2014. Now, all of this is to say that science about testosterone and its physiological advantages is still at an early stage. For every bit of science that supports trans inclusion in sports, there is just as much science against it.
The second ground on which trans women supposedly have an advantage over cis women, physical aspects such as more stamina, larger bones, and more muscle. It's an undeniable fact that male puberty does give physiological advantages to males over females across the board, which is why Michael Phelps won the 200 meters freestyle in 1.42.96 at the Beijing Olympics, breaking the world record, whereas Federica Pellegrini broke the women's world record at the same distance, finishing in 1.54.82. A time that wouldn't have even gotten her into the men's semi-finals. Which is also why ace tennis player Serena Williams told David Letterman that were she to play Andy Murray, I would lose 6-0, 6-0 in maybe 10 minutes. End quote. Here's what's important to remember though, that there is an obsessive focus on male bodies and testosterone in medical science. Relatively very little research on how estrogen impacts physiology or what female bodies can do, and they can do a lot, especially with ultra endurance. Thousands of trans athletes compete at national and international competitions, all don't win, all don't qualify for the Olympics, even with all their apparent unfair advantages. So clearly, there is something more apart from their gender or sex. But these two arguments of testosterone and male puberty giving trans women an unfair advantage is the crux of the unfair advantage argument. It is unfair if you ask Quinini Manumua, the 21-year-old Tongan who would have gone to her first Olympics if Hubbard hadn't been selected, or if you ask former Olympian Tracy Lambrex, who had to drop 40 pounds in 3 months to compete at a lower weight class if she wanted to represent New Zealand at the Commonwealth Games, because Laurel had begun competing after transitioning and broken all her records. It is important to remember that the criticism, besides the transphobia, is also coming from sections of women athletes who fear all their years of training and hard work will all be for nothing if trans women are allowed to compete. Not all. Laurel's competitor at the upcoming Olympics, Australian weightlifter Charisma Ammo-Tarrant, has supported her participation. So, how do we navigate this discomfort? Can we dare to reimagine sports? Experts have suggested 3 ways till now. Besides men's and women's sports, a third mixed category for trans, non-binary, cis men and women to compete against each other. In Tokyo 2020, in addition to the traditional categories, there will already be new mixed gender events. Another way to do this, as suggested by Tanya Allred in The Guardian, is to create 2 categories, one for women's sports and one for men, trans women and trans men who take testosterone. A third way, as suggested by physiologists at the University of Otago in New Zealand, would be to create an algorithm to account for factors such as testosterone, endurance, gender identity, etc.
So, this is a work in progress conversation. The conundrum is, do we wait for evidence to prove inclusion in sports is fair or not, or we just go ahead? But equally important is how we have this conversation. How we talk about Laurel's case or any other athlete caught in the binary views of sex and gender. That's equally important. A lot of the comments on our Instagram post on Laurel were hateful and transphobic. The arguments had little to do with the nuance we've just mentioned a few minutes ago. Trans women are women. That's not up for debate, right? A verbal bile about Laurel being an unqualified man with a penis who started wearing dresses so she could win or game the system is a disturbing and an odd suggestion. Do we really think that Laurel and trans athletes who go through an exhausting transition process and a painful surgery and train all the while facing prejudice and bigotry that trans people face on a daily basis do so to actually game the system? Well, before you answer, here's some data. Since 2004, it has been possible for trans athletes to compete in the Olympics. The IOC modified the guidelines on testosterone levels for trans women athletes in 2015. More than 50,000 athletes have participated in the Olympics since 2004. No trans athlete has ever been a part of the Olympics until Laurel. We'll leave it here. If this has been worthy of your time, do share this video with your friends and family, and do consider making a small contribution. The link to contribute to help Newsworthy do more such work is in our bio or in the description. But keep this conversation going. We'll see you again very soon.